Then we were fighting for that right. Also, they want to control women's bodies, autonomy. Uh, why would they want to do that? Well, they had the same fear then that they do back then. Women were more likely to get married because, again, they weren't as aware of the opportunities. They were coming out of the dark, out of the cave, so to speak, and seeing the sunlight. But now we have seen the sunlight. We live in the sunlight. We take the sunlight for granted. We take it so much for granted that we have silly women getting on podcasts talking about, "Oh, yeah, well, I'm not a feminist. I can't believe in feminists. Feminists take away the family. I'm not with the modern feminists. Blah, 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 blah. Feminists, 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 feminists." Well, then women had gone through hell to get the right to vote. They were beaten in the streets. They were ostracized by family and equality too. So did the Native American women who were not even citizens. So this little article tells so much about the thinking of the time, about the lawmaking of the time, and about government, because the United States government it played a very big role in keeping women oppressed. One of the pet peeves, well, it's not even a pet peeve, I am outraged by is when Barack Obama, who was telling women that he believed in our right to reproduce and all that, and he had the Senate and the House, because they're gonna tell you he never had that, but he did. Now they're rewriting history. But he had the Senate and the House, and the reporter says to him, "Mr. President, is it time for you to codify Roe v. Wade?" And he, in his customized laughter, said, "Ha ha 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 ha. It's not a legislative." And that's when I began to realize that we have no ally. Misogyny is part of the plan. The government is part of the plan. And you'll see how the government played its role to collaborate with eugenicists, with businesses, to keep women out, to keep women suppressed, and how the road to hell was paved with good intentions. But yet, because they suppressed people and because they did all these things to try to keep women out of the commercial life, as they would say, it turned out to be good for everybody. But here we go. All right. I'm not going to talk about it anymore, but I want to explain that to you. I want to put it in some kind of context because it's very important that we understand how they were thinking back then and what they were thinking. So take this any way you want. All right. The progressives attempt, and just for the record, before I start, this is not me choosing to be a progressive or a conservative. I'm simply reading the article, and I've been reading the article many times. And this is about the right of women and how government interferes to keep women out of the workforce. Very similarly to what they're doing today. You know how whether they downgrade teachers and nurses, they're going to limit the type of money you can get to be educated as a teacher and as a nurse. They say that's no longer a professional career. Why? Because it's all dominated by women. Why? Because men are falling behind. I did a video about that. Go check that out. But here we go. The progressives attempt to halt progress. This is part one. Many now credit government for past progress in gender equality, mostly because of late 20th century legislation that appeared to benefit women in the workplace. This is a distorted view. Few know that government at all levels actually sought to prevent that progress. A century ago, just as markets were attracting women to professional life, government regulation in the United States specifically targeted women to restrict their professional choices. The regulations were designed to drive them out of offices and factories and back into their homes for their own good and the good of their families, their communities, and the future of the race. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but the population drop off was very much in discussion then. This is why they wanted to halt women's progress because they were afraid if women progressed too much, they wouldn't want, well, we wouldn't want to have children and the family dynamic will split apart. That was then them trying to prevent what they are still afraid of today, which is the population drop off. You notice that's always in discussion. They're trying not to panic about it. They panicked about it 100 years ago, and they're panicking about it now, but it's a very slow, quiet panic. They don't want to, well, I don't know. It looks like they're trying to make inroads into making it more difficult for women to enter the workforce. But you let me know what you think. The new controls, the first around the century, excuse me, the first round of a century of interventions in the free labor market were designed to curb the sweeping changes in economics and demographics that were taking place due to material advances in the last quarter of the 19th century. The regulations limited women's choices so that they would stop making what elites considered the wrong decision. Now, you see that a little bit today. We just talked about that, how they're trying to downgrade women's professions and limit the amount of money you can borrow to be educated in those professions, namely nurses, teachers, and I forgot what the other one was. Forgive me. Uh, but you see that happening now, right? That they're definitely trying to limit how much women can advance in society for the benefit of men. Like I said, I made a video about men falling behind. They're not going to college. They're not attending college. They're not graduating. Not on the same level as women are. They're dropping out of the workforce because they're not educated. Times are changing and men are falling behind. And yes, daddy government will come in and try to save men because really the damsels in distress are men. They're the damsels in distress. All this puffing and huffing and threatening and oh, we are powerful and oh, we are the providers and protectors. This is all rhetoric to inspire men to go out and be providers and protectors because they're not. Women are taking control, women are surpassing. And this is what they were afraid of years ago. The real story, which is only beginning to emerge within academic literature, is striking. It upends prevailing narratives about the relationship between government and women's rights. Many cornerstones of the early welfare and regulatory state were designed to hobble women's personal liberty and economic advancement. They were not progressive, but reactionary, an attempt to turn back the clock. And you see how that happens in today's world because now they want to talk about 1950s housewives. They want women to, you know, more and more men are coming up on the internet and on what they say, Beyonce's internet. And I believe a woman should not vote. I believe a woman should be in the kitchen. This is not a woman's place. And you have women out here. They parade them around, pay them lots of money to tell young women, "Oh, I trust my husband, and I believe I like not working." Which let me be clear. This is not me hating on women who want to be stay-at-home moms. This is not me hating on women who make choices to be housewives. This is me letting you know that men are trying to take away your choice. There's nothing wrong with a woman who works. There's nothing wrong with a woman who works and is a mother. There's nothing wrong with a woman who stays at home. But when I talk about women staying at home, you should do so with your eyes wide open because men change, you change, anything can change. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad change. It could be, it just changes. And for you to sit here and put your whole entire trust when generations over 100 years ago told you that's not a good idea, puts you in a vulnerable position. The quickest way to poverty is to be a single mother for women. And so if you can prevent something, prevention being better than the cure, why not do so? Feminism is not about excluding women at all. I could be frustrated that you're all kind of silly and that you don't understand what you're giving up. But I respect your right as a woman to make the choice, no matter whether or not I agree. These people are trying to take away the women's choice before you even had a choice to do anything. And they're still trying to minimize your choices as much as possible. So we go to the next part of the article, and it says women's work is not new. It was the freedom and opportunity realized in the latter period of the 19th century that changed everything for women workers, opening up new lines of employment. Remember, women did work. I don't know who keeps running around here telling people that women just stayed at home and didn't work. They did. Some certain classes of women didn't have to work, but the regular women, the masses, those women had to go out and work. Mostly it was domestic work if they could sell pies and cakes and that kind of thing. Uh, they sold their bodies, not just in that way, but if they had a baby and they had milk, they sold their mother's milk. What do you call those people? Wet nurses. They were wet nurses to wealthy families. There was always some way for women to make money out of the home. There were very limited ways because again, women were limited in their education and where they could go and what they could do. But the Industrial Revolution opened the door for women to have more opportunity. And now, what are we going to do? The growth of industrial capitalism meant that women could leave the farm and move to the city. They could choose to leave home without having married and even stay in the workforce as married women. They enjoyed more choice in education and professional life than ever before. But by 1910, fully 45% of professional workforce was made of women. They almost entirely dominated the teaching profession, for example. Single women increasingly found work as nurses, librarians, secretaries, and social workers, as well as factory workers in the garment industry. Women, most of them unmarried, constituted 21% of the entire workforce. So more women had opportunity, more women can make money. Uh, that therefore taking women out of abject poverty, not making them as desperate to get married and find a man and all that kind of stuff. You could actually take care of yourself. And this was a boon to women. This is what gave us the door to walk through and fight for our rights. I wonder why people are so against capitalism because without capitalism, without the industrial revolution, we really had nowhere to go. We had nowhere to go. You can fight for your rights, but if you there are no jobs for you, where are you going to go? We could fight for civil rights, but without having capitalism, where are you going to go? New clerical jobs, unknown a century earlier, were everywhere to be had. Women's wages were rising quickly by an impressive 16% from 1890 through 1920. Nor were women working at exploitative wages. A Rand Corporation study of wage differentials discovered an interesting fact. Women's wages relative to men's were higher in 1920 than they were in 1980. And I believe that because women were fighting like hell in 1980. 1980 was a time, girl. Jesus. Women were still submitting to their husbands, helping their husbands find a career, working while the husband went to school, while he had graduated from college, sacrificing everything, taking care of the house, the dog, the baby, his career, his moods, his everything, only for him to graduate. Excuse me. Only for him to graduate. Excuse me again. Only for him to graduate, feel himself, and then leave his wife for a younger mom. You might have heard of that. The most famous case of that was Broderick. What's her name? Oh my God. I should have written it down. Broderick case. I know her name is Broderick. Betty Broderick. Betty Broderick case. Not only that, I had lived through that. This is about the time when my mother was working for a feminist, excuse me, the president of the National Organization for Women in New Jersey. She was working for her. And these women had done exactly what Betty Broderick had done. They had worked, uh, given up their life for these men, and these men ended up leaving these women for younger models and taking the money, by the way, taking the money, leaving them destitute. And if women, some of the women were not college educated because they sacrificed their lives for the man, for his career, investing in him, submitting to him, doing what they were supposed to do for him, only for him to leave and take all the money and leave them in poverty. And these were the times. So now, 1980, women were trying to get back into the workforce, these married women, and they hadn't been working for a long time, because they were taking care of the house. They were, helping him. And, you know, times had changed. They weren't those people anymore. So, yes, the wages were higher in 1920 because they were trying to roll back the clock. All right. I apologize for that rant. Let's go on to the next part. The law intervenes. And yet, pardon me. And yet, there were also the years in which we first saw government intervention in the labor market, which much of it specifically targeting women. As historian Thomas Leonard argues in his spectacular book, Illiberal Reformers, that was 2016, an entire generation of intellectuals and politicians panicked about what this could mean for the future of humanity. Now, do we not hear the same rhetoric that we do today? You see the parallels, right? Then we didn't have rights, we didn't have the vote, blah blah blah. But we're making money, we're making progress. Today we have rights, we have the vote, we're making progress. They see that we're making a little too much progress. That women are now not choosing to get married, not choosing to have babies because the world is increasingly misogynist. They're not making it comfortable for women to be mothers. Their childcare is exorbitantly expensive. Like it's exorbitant, ridiculous. Back 20 something years ago, my daughter's 23, I believe. Um, I paid $133 a week for childcare to put her in childcare in the daycare. Today is over $1,000 a month. $1,000 a month. How are you expected to work and take care of your children? Now, I want to put in a little buzz. Back then, when women did have to work, daycare was considered a charity. You could put your children in the charity of daycare for the day while you go work in the factory. But now it's not a charity; it's actually a business. So somebody's got to pay for daycare because it's a regulated business now. So somebody's got to pay for it, and who better to pay for it than the government, who benefits when women work. Back then, they didn't see the benefit of women working. Now they do. So why can't the government pay for daycare? But they don't want to do that. They want to put the onus on women. If you just stay at home and you be a stay at home mom, you won't need daycare. You won't need any government assistance. You will be there to be the parent for the children. They want to shift the burden not to society, but back to women and only women. So it goes on to read this. Oh. Society must control reproduction. Roe v. Wade, right? It wasn't there back then. I'm not saying that. So if you're listening, that's not what I'm saying. Okay. So society must control reproduction and therefore what women do with their lives. So said the prevailing ideology of the age. We couldn't have a situation in which markets entice women to leave the control of their families and move to the city. Hell no. What are you thinking? Though they were called progressives, the reformers' rhetoric had more in common with the family values movement of the 1970s and 80s, with the pseudoscientific race paranoia playing the role that religion would later play. In many ways, they were the ultimate conservatives, attempting to roll back the tide of history made possible by the advance of the capitalist economy. That's right, because the Industrial Revolution gave women opportunity. Now you'll hear some rhetoric and they'll say, oh, they pushed women into the workforce. No, they didn't. Women wanted to work. They knew that they needed to work. In order to escape poverty, women needed to work. Men were not these great protectors and providers. The reason why there was that, what was that? They had to stop the liquor. I'm so sorry. Because men were going to the pub drinking all the money away, gambling all the money away, and women had to go down to the pub and fight these men for the money because he was a drunk. He didn't get he if he gambled and drank all the money all afternoon, they couldn't pay the rent and they couldn't feed the kids. Women always had to work because men weren't always didn't always get those great fantastic jobs that they got later in the 50s. Opportunity was there for them too, but they weren't getting the pay. They didn't really want to work like that. They wanted their cake and eat it too. And women were beginning to realize, oh my goodness, we can't rely on men to take care of us. And on top of that, just not even talking about men's bad behavior or women's bad behavior for those of you who want to quantify. But men die. They die. They become incapacitated. So if a husband becomes incapacitated, what's a woman to do? The whole family is to go into poverty and beg on the streets. It's in society's best interest to have an educated system, educated women. And they knew this because World War II came around and they were very thankful that those women had education because they could read, they could comprehend, they could understand. They were able to build machines in World War II. They were able to do the jobs and keep the economy running in World War II. Think about if they were incapacitated. Think about if those women were ignorant and illiterate. See, they saw what would happen if men disappeared. Women would thrive. Women would be okay. And this is the first time that the government tried to intervene to keep women back so that men could advance. The second time was World War II, but we'll talk about that later. They were incredibly successful. because they actually passed some laws, and these are where the laws come in. Over a 10-year period between 1909 and 1919, 40 states restricted the number of hours that women employees could work. 15 states passed new minimum wage laws to limit entry level jobs. See, minimum wage was not meant to advance you. Minimum wage was meant to, uh, uh, oh God, that word was, it was meant to hobble you so that you couldn't make too much money, so that you couldn't take care of a family. See, you have to understand these things because we're fighting the fight. Oh, we have to raise the minimum wage. But the whole intention of minimum wage was for you to not advance, but to be hobbled. And it all started with women. Race came later, but it all starts with the woman. If they can fiddle around with what women's rights and what women do, then they can fiddle around with everybody else. It goes on to read this. Most states created stipends for single parent families. This is when they started inventing welfare, specifically to incentivize women to reject commercial life, return to protected domesticity, and stop competing with men's wage for men for wages. Welfare was number one, not created for black women, but its true intention was never to help you advance either. It did what it was supposed to do. It kept you bound in chains. Its job, its duty, its responsibility was to keep you out of the workforce. That's why when black women got on welfare, they were mired in chains. They were held back because welfare, again, it starts off with their own women. Their own women. If they do it to their own women, they can do it to other people. So it starts out with their own women. If they made sure that the women would be stymied just enough to keep you above water, to keep your nostrils. You're still touching the water. You still could drown, but just enough. And if we look over the years in the 60s, uh, where we had some success, where the Man in the Home Act was uh, thrown was oh God, what's the word? When the Supreme Court rejected it, struck it down, ruled it unconstitutional because it was. The effects of welfare still had its grips in the heels of black women. Why? Because black men had failed, but they didn't fail alone. And we will talk about that later in another podcast. Racism, all these isms were coming up. And black men in and of themselves made some very horrible choices. It's sort of like a Sophie's choice, you know? We'll sit here and drown with this awful monster, or we could climb out. Excuse me. I'm so sorry about my voice. Anyhow, such laws were completely new in American history and in almost all modern history. Excuse me. You notice he said in almost all modern history. Like I said, they tried this again in World War II because they intervened so fundamentally in the right of workers and employees to make any sort of contract. The progressives' agenda involved government deeply in issues that directly affected people's ability to provide for themselves. It also created unprecedented impositions on both employees and their employers, such as laws would have been inconceivable. Excuse me, such laws would have been inconceivable even 50 years earlier. Now, I don't know who's going to be mad about this, but they're going to say, oh my God, you're talking about the progressives. It is the habit of progressives, and we know this because Biden interfered with the railroad employees to keep them from protesting from here on out in order to make a deal. So the government has a bad habit of interfering intervening into the lives of the workers and the employees. But in this case, they wanted to hobble women. And then the question is asked, how did this all happen so fast and why? So it started out, like I said before, with women. They're women. And they have to hobble their women by telling women that they are inferior. Men have it, women are inferior to men. And this Richard T. Ely, who is influential founder of the American Economic Association and the godfather of progressive economics, explained the issue clearly, laying the groundwork for laws that follow. His 1894 book, Socialism and Social Reform, expressed a panic about women's entry into the workforce. And this is what he wrote. Restrictions, this is what he wrote now. Restrictions should be thrown about the employment of married women, and their employment for a considerable period before and after childbirth should be prohibited under any circumstance. There should also be a restriction of the workday, as in England, for children and young persons under 18, and for women. Such a limitation having beneficial effect upon the health of the community. Night work should be prohibited for women and persons under 18 years of age, and in particular, all work injurious to female organisms should be forbidden to women. And that's the end of the quote. So, although it looks like it's very well intentioned, the onus is on the female organism. And it goes on to read this. In reference to the female organism, sounds strange. Remember that this generation of intellectuals believed in eugenics. This is eugenics took the place of what religion is today. So religion has its ground in its family values, blah 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 blah, women in the home, blah 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 blah. But back then, the grounding force was eugenics. The race was the human race, right? So it goes on to read this. Using state force to plan the emergence of the model race, and hence saw women mainly as propagators of the race, not human individuals with right to choose. Did I not read that right? Okay. Using state force to plan the emergence of model race, and hence saw women mainly as propagators of the race, not human individuals with the right to choose. For anyone who believed that the government had a responsibility to plan human production, and most intellectuals at the time did believe this, the role of women was critical. They couldn't be allowed to do what they wanted, go where they wanted, or make lives for themselves. This was the normal thought pattern of the generation that gave United States unprecedented legal restrictions on the labor market. And they have been interfering in the labor market ever since. The Supreme Court weighs in. Consider the Supreme Court case of Muller versus Oregon, which considered state legislation on maximum working hours and decided in favor of the state. Oregon was hardly unusual. It was the typical was typical of the 20 states that had already passed such laws directed at women's freedom to choose employment. From the net from the text of Colorado's law passed in 1903, no woman, this is what they said, this is the law they passed, shall work or labor for a greater number than 8 hours in the 24-hour day. Where such work, labor, or occupation by its nature requires a woman to stand upon her feet. End quote. So now they're telling you what kind of work you can do. I think it was last year or the year before, 2024. I posted so much content on this. But they were passing laws in certain states that if you caused a miscarriage, if the state concluded that you caused a miscarriage, you could be sentenced to prison. And it included the work that you did, the labor, bartending, waitressing, anything that required you to stand on your feet while pregnant could land you in jail. In fact, I have an article. I think a young woman was arrested because she miscarried. I want to illustrate to you how this never dies, how it has insinuated itself into our very fabric of who we are today, and why it's so difficult to fight, and why feminism must continue to fight. It's no time to rest on our laurels. It's time to continue the fight because the whole idea, misogyny being what it is, never rests. Look at what they thought. Look what they established. Look what they codified. And look at how it lives on today in the minds of men and boys. In the red pill, which is poisoning the men and boys right now, the 13, the 14-year-olds, and the grown men. The young men, I don't even know what to say. The decision of Mueller v. Oregon then ratified such laws over the country. Today, this case is widely considered the foundation of progressive labor law. What's not well known is that the brief that settled the case was a remarkable piece of pseudoscience that argued for the inferiority of women and hence their need for special protection from the demands of commercial enterprise. The brief was filed by future Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis. And then they talk about the brief. And the brief is weird as hell. It's saying that women's blood is made of water, more water than men. Women can't concentrate. Women have no brains. Again, muscular strength, nervous energy, the same rhetoric that we're experiencing today. The same thing. Men are making it known. Women don't have upper body strength. You can't do what a man does. Blah, blah, blah. Men. Men are stronger. We have power. We can force you to do all the same rhetoric. Because in order for the men to be powerful, they have to convince the women that we are weaker. They have to convince women that we are less intelligent. They have to convince women that our place is not at the table. Even though, and I'm talking to the Christian conservatives because the eugenicists already had their time. I'm talking to the Christian conservatives. Even though Jesus walked this earth and told women by his actions that we too have a place at the table, at the table in the kingdom of God, men still want to drag women out and ostracize us. They want to be in control of our soul. They want to be in control of our body. And they want women, some of these women, silly women, to be convinced that this is true. I hope this makes sense to you. I really do. I hope that I'm making those parallels. This is so important. This is so important because I want you to know it never dies. The weird and awful Brandeis brief. The Brandeis brief argued that the law had to stop the massive influx of women into the workforce because women have special susceptibility to fatigue and disease. Because female blood has more water in it than men's blood. Their blood composition also accounts for why women have less focus, energy, and strength generally, according to the brief. Now, we all know that's not true. And it goes on to say physicians are agreed that women are fundamentally weaker than men in all that makes for endurance and muscular strength, in nervous energy, and the powers of persistent attention and application. End quote. Moreover, in strength as well as in rapidity and precision of movement, women are inferior to men. This is not a conclusion that has ever been contested. Long hours are more disastrous for the health of women than to men, the brief explained. As therefore, the government must regulate work hours for the health, safety, morals, and general welfare of women. Restrictions on work hours were therefore essential. And he goes on to quote, it is great hygienic importance on account of the more delicate physical organization of women. The brief goes on to read, and will contribute much toward the better care of children and the maintenance of a regular family life. End quote. Now you'll say, well, what was weird about that? That's generally what people believe anyway. That women's place is in the home and women do better. Well, the children do better in the two family home. And blah, 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 blah. Listen, it's the weapon used to keep women from making choices. Telling women that their bodies are made, their blood is made of water. Really? That we can't stand for long periods of time? Look at us. Look at how we progressed. Look at women becoming doctors, lawyers, bartenders, whatever we want to be. I believe there are more women becoming doctors than there are men. Look at us. But you'll still have some women who say, well, the women are not into the CEO positions and they're not big bosses and they're not senators and lawyers and there are more women in these positions and growing in these positions than there are men because women are becoming more educated. They're more likely to have these jobs than men are. Now, we're going to switch gears for a little bit. We're going to talk about women's work in misogyny and how sometimes it be your own gender. I talked about this throughout the podcast. It irks me to no end. You expect men to be misogynist. You don't expect women to work against the cause, the very cause that gave them a voice to speak in the first place. You don't expect them to work against you, and yet they do. And yet they do. So I'm going to take a minute for the cause and I'm going to pause. And I'm going to be back with the other side of Florence Kelly. Florence Kelly was and is a great. She helped establish work hours and all these things. She did great work. But the work she did was grounded in misogyny. And I don't even know what she looks like. I assume she's blonde because whenever they want to change the world, they always use a blonde haired, blue eyed woman who is highly educated to convince convince other women that you should not be highly educated as well. So I'm going to take a little break and I'll be right back and we'll talk about women's place in the role of misogyny. Hello, and now I'm back on the other side of the uh, on the other side. Now, where we left off with the Brandeis report, that absurd little report saying how inferior women were to men, and we couldn't leave the snaky misogynist. I'm sorry, I just got a little distracted here. The snaky misogyny without women playing their role in it. And Florence Kelly, as I previously stated, was very mighty in the progressive movement when it came to labor and the maximum work hours, those kinds of things. She was very instrumental in children's rights. But there is a flip side. There's always the story that isn't being told. We always tell the good side, but we don't tell the entire side. And Florence Kelly was a woman who didn't believe that women should work. She didn't like electricity because she believed women should be at home reading to their children by candlelight. She didn't like progress. She wasn't about progress, especially not for women. And she did her bit to play her role. She did her bit. She played her role. She did her duty to God. I would say eugenics in country, to put a wrench into working women or giving women the choice to work. So in this next part, we're going to read about Florence Kelly, a well-educated woman who didn't believe in the rights of women. And here it goes. It goes, one might suspect that the entire effort was a male-driven one to stop female progress, but that's not the case. A leader in the campaign for such labor interventions was writer and activist Florence Kelly. Modern progressives celebrate her activism for maximum work hours, the 10-hour workday, minimum wages, and children's rights. Indeed, she is considered a great hero by the sanitized version of history that progressives tell each other. But before we cheer her accomplishments, however, we should look at Kelly's driving motivation, because everything has a motivation, doesn't it? Oh, my computer's starting to act up now. Okay. Woo, 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 woo. Hey. All right. So now my computer's starting to do this weird thing here. Okay. Let's go back and now it will stop. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, this happens. I guess Florence Kelly is intervening. She doesn't like anything being spoken about her. She is a hero and she wants to remain so. We're just talking about the other side and women's roles in this side. So we start off, we said before we cheer her, let's look at her motivation. Writing in the American Journal of Sociology, she explained that she wanted a minimum wage as a wage floor to, and this is what she says, stop manufacturing plants and retail outlets from employing women for less than they could otherwise employ men. Retail stores, she wrote, tend to minimize the employment of men, substituting them for women, girls, and boys, employed largely at less than living wages. It was precisely such competition from women and children that Kelly intended to stop, so that men could earn higher wages and women could return to traditional roles. In her book, Some Ethical Gains Through Legislation, written in 1905, Kelly said that the long working hours had to be ended for women because commercial life was introducing vice. For those of you who don't know what vice meant in the early 1900s, it meant sex, okay? Into communities. Yes, women had sex outside of marriage. Dun, dun, dun. It wasn't this high moral society that everybody is talking about and this fantasy that they keep trying to sell you. Humans did human things and lived a human life. But let's go. And it says here, vice is euphemism for sex. Worse. Women were choosing commercial life over a home on their own initiative. Kelly considered it necessary to restrict women's rights for their own health and morality, she said, and also to boost men's wages so women would stay home under the care of their mothers, fathers, suitors, and husbands. Moreover, to make such work illegal would make righteous living more practical for women. If they stopped being rewarded in wages, they would return to domestic life. Kelly even regretted the invention of electricity because it allowed women to work late at factories when they should be at home reading to children by firelight. Now, I like how she said if we stop rewarding women with wages, um, wages are for living. And you have to ask yourself, why were women working in the first place? I think I mentioned this earlier in the podcast that women had to work. Men became incapacitated. Men had bad behavior. Men had issues such as alcohol and their own vice, and oftentimes used their financial leverage to hammer it over women's heads and the children and leave them destitute and in poverty. And the woman going to the landlord begging for leniency. So by women working, it lifted families out of poverty. And this, I believe, this is only my conjecture, didn't make men look good. Because if women could lift their families out of poverty, why couldn't the men? The men didn't. They simply didn't. So women going out to work, understanding that she wanted to take care of herself. She wants her children to have a good education. She wants a roof over her head. She wants decent clothes to wear. She wants to be a human being. And she doesn't want the frustration of lying on the one income to hold on just a minute, to save her from the street. Okay. Sorry about that. To save her from the streets. Moreover, once a woman is making her own money, you can't tell her what to do. You have no say. Mama has no say. Daddy got no say. Suitors got no say. Husbands got no say. Nobody's got no say when you have your own money. Money is power. When you can pay your own rent, that's power. When you can pay your rent in a car, that's power. When you can pay your rent, your car, and all your furniture, all your bills, that's power. Nobody can tell a person who has power what to do. And even back then, 100 years ago, they saw that power was shifting away from men. In Kelly's view, the ideal role of women with children is not to enter commercial life at all. Family life, and this is her quote, in the home is sapped in its foundation when mothers of young children work for wages. I don't know what women are supposed to work for. It is it's an opinion with which some may still sympathize. Would such an opinion be imposed on working families by coercive legislation? For the paragon of progressive social reform, it was clear that lawmakers had to force women back into the home. First run. And this is the crux of the question. Should legislation coerce women into being housewives? Because we know, right? We know. We see the rolling back Project 2025, all these things. We see what they're trying to do. They're trying to put the cap back on the lid. China is making these subtle threats, but it's pretty difficult to control all these women. They're like, well, women should go back in the home. They're trying. The world is trying. They're in a panic. They don't want us to see that they're in a panic, but they are definitely in a panic. And so every now and then, the conversation of women are going to be alone because they want to shame you into shame you into marrying. And then they want to talk about your body count because now they want to shame you into what? Marrying, settling for whomever wants to be a good man. And I find it very fascinating that nobody, when you ask men, what is a good man, nobody knows what that is. Certainly, they don't know what it is without a woman in it. So all the tactics are being employed. All the tactics are being employed. They want women back in the home. They did it in World War II. When the men came home from war, they put up the signs. It's time for women to go back to home. You are needed, women, back in your home. They collaborated with businesses, push these women out. We need to give these jobs to our men. And the men whined, oh, we don't want to compete with women. We don't want to have to compete with foreigners and women. We want our jobs all to ourselves. And so Big Daddy government comes in, says, all right, businesses, send them women home. Send them home. Second time. Now they're trying to make a third attempt because they want women, well, we already know. Florence Kelly and the movement she represented sought to disemploy women and get everyone back to pre-modern form of domestic living. She wanted not more rights for women, but fewer. The workplace was properly for men who were to get paid high wages sufficient for the whole family. That was the basis for her support of a range of legislation to drive women out of the workforce and put an end to the new range of options available to them, options that many women were happy to choose. So, as we already established, not only were the men in the panic, but they had educated, highly educated, intelligent women also in their corner. I want to make a point here too. These were progressives, you know, the Democrats, the progressive people. And this is what they were doing. And I made a statement earlier about Barack Obama, who had the opportunity to do something progressive for women and decided not to because it wasn't a legislative priority. I want us to understand as women that we have no allies whatsoever. There, it doesn't matter if they are liberal, if they consider themselves male feminists, they are not our allies. They are not our allies. They all work for the common good. It's the good cop and the bad cop scenario. The one that will trick us into voting for the one while simultaneously being undermined by the other. The Democrats are, in a way, almost as conservative in their values and views as the, the conservatives. Because you see, even when Biden knew that Roe v. Wade was going to fall, he did nothing. He could have gotten Congress together and wrote a law, at least try, but they did nothing because they had no intentions of doing anything. They knew that Roe v. Wade was going to fall for the past. The fact that it stood for 50 years was astounding, but they knew it was eventually going to fall. It was never meant to stand, and they did nothing. I want you to understand that we have no allies. There was a question asked, and there was a panel, the feminists against the non-feminists or whatever. And one of the non-feminists asked, when does it stop? When do you have enough? Because these women who are male identified think that you can stop now. But the same rhetoric, the same ideas, the same ideals have been not resting. They have been up and going, taking on new forms, new faces, new voices. They almost sound reasonable. Now they're beautiful women standing on stage, glamorous with tight white dresses, telling women, oh, you can give up your vote now. There are family values. They sell you on the Christian society, the theocracy, where all will be good. This utopia of Christianity, where all will be good. And if we just take away the outside forces, if women stop having money, then things will go back to normal. Remember when the food stamps thing was gone for a little bit. And some of the men got online and had a laugh because they believed that food stamps made women rich, which I just don't know how you come to that conclusion. But my point is that there are no allies in your corner. And if you're a black woman, you especially don't have allies in your corner. So the eugenicists, wrote extensively about the working women. Now, I'm just going to share this little bit, and I'm not going to read the whole article. It's a very short article, and I've already been too long on this. I actually wanted to make this a short video. But the more I read this, the more I see the parallels of what they were talking about, what they said 100 years ago versus what they're fighting now. And even though we're in a different position now, we have come so far, we still have to fight. I said this before, I'll say it again. I'm going to keep reiterating, we still have to fight. So I'm going to go over this because I thought this was kind of funny. Um, this is uh, white supremacy at its best, but I thought when I first read this that they were talking about black women, but they weren't. They were talking about Eastern Europeans because they looked down on them too. They were also undesirable. And they were saying how working would make women ugly, uh, wide back, flat breasted, broad face, short necked. These were attributes of women that were considered unattractive. And then he said, you know, the women of Prussia were bearing children in the morning and going out and working in the fields in the afternoon. And that lovely American women should not be out here working and and messing with their looks because working, you know, makes women ugly. And then he goes on to say, think of the discouraging situation of a young man who, after he has been married for 2 or 3 years, finds he has a wife at the age of 28 or 30, has collapsed, become a miserable invalid, suffering aches and pains all the time. Why she might find herself unable to keep the home attractive and all of this because of just a few extra dollars added to the profits of the employer and the few extra dollars saved to the consumer. Nothing to do with what the women needed, what the family needed, just some money to the consumer and money to the employer. You notice how that language is the same. They want to beat into your head that you having opportunities is wrong. They want to be into your head that you working for yourself is a bad thing. It's an effective message because I see sometimes that it's getting through to a lot of young people. To be an individual, to stand for yourself, to have high standards is a lonely, hard road. Only the few can get it. You won't please all the men. You won't please the majority of the men. You will only be attractive to the few. But they have women so brainwashed that women want to appeal to all the men. They want to be beautiful to all the men. They want to be attractive to all men, as many men as possible. Because that's been drummed into our head. It's drummed into the media. It's drummed into everything that we do. You have to be appealing to men. You notice when the red pill talk, they say men, all men, because they speak for all men, of course, don't like this. They don't like hair extensions. They don't like lashes. They don't like women with tattoos. They speak for all men because your job as a woman is to be appealing to as many men as possible. But when you have the power, you don't need all the men. You don't need as many men as possible. You only need a few. You only need really one. But you don't need all of their attention. And now, in order to be really to fight feminism, you have to kind of give up on your looks a little bit and you have to go against the grain. The 4B movement, this great and mighty movement in Korea, which they keep downplaying, they made a decision that they will no longer be attractive to men. They don't wear makeup. They don't do their hair. They don't wear special clothes. Because in order to be effective, you can't be useful to men. You can't be pleasurable to men. And it's a difficult thing for me. I'm one of those people to disengage from those ideas that we must be attractive to all men, that we must wear a face, that our hair must be a certain way. And that's what they want to strip you from. They want to strip you from that individuality. They want you to be all women want to be mothers and wives, which is inherently and has been inherently untrue for thousands of years. Entire species of plants that cause women to miscarry are extinct because women did not want to have babies, too many babies, etc. They want to take that power from you. So it's important to understand. 'Cause I'm pretty much done with this. Uh, they talked about welfare, how welfare was invented for women, and I think I talked about that. I touched on that, how it did its job to keep you down. Its intention was realized through black women by keeping black women down. Uh, I didn't talk about how black women were not allowed to be housewives and how these laws, rules, and regulations did not always apply to them. Uh, there was a case, wasn't a case actually. It was uh, a newspaper article in South Carolina where men had actually been supporting their wives, black men. They were in the military, they were making money, they were supporting their wives, and the wives did not need to work for the white women. And the white women were pissed off. Yes, just like in The Color Purple, they see a black woman who's clean and they think that that woman should work for them. So say they were offering these women jobs. Do you want to work for me? So and so, and the women would politely decline. No, thank you, Miss So and so. I don't want to work. I don't need to work for you now. My husband makes good money. I don't need to work for nobody. To which these women went to their husbands and said, look, we got to do something about this. And so they got together with their husbands, their little powerful husbands, and they made a law that black women couldn't be housewives. It was against the law for women, black women, to be housewives. They were obligated to work by law, to work in a domestic situation, whether they needed to work or not. Because heaven forbid, a white woman had to do her own damn dishes. And I don't say that because I hate on white people. I just want to make that distinction how these eugenicists thought about women and women's rights. And I want you to understand that it all starts with the woman, their woman. When they can strip their woman of her rights, they can do anything they want to any other woman. And when they were fighting these women to keep them from the workforce, they were, in this particular situation in South Carolina, they were keeping women from being housewives. Black women wanted to be housewives. They wanted to be taken care of. They wanted to be soft, but they were not allowed to be because of Southern rule. But they were able to do that because they had already dehumanized and denigrated their own women. I posted that article on TikTok. It's the only one of my videos that had 0 views. Nobody read it. Nobody saw the video. 0 views. 0 on TikTok. So there was a disparity. I did, those are the points I wanted to make. Number one, it starts with their woman. Number two, yes, they want to take the rights. They want to drive this, turn back the clock. I'm sorry. I don't mean to get all tied up. They want to drive back the clock. Number three, they want to use women to do it. Because if you look at this beautiful, educated, intelligent woman and she's telling you all this stuff, then you start to doubt yourself. What kind of woman am I? What feminism does is it removes the doubt and tells you that you can be any kind of woman you want to be. And it applies to both black women and white women, to all women, all of us. Don't let these people tell you that being a feminist is a sin. It is not. What is a sin is the oppression of human beings. That's the sin. I want to close with this part of the article because it's very important that we know about history. And I hope that I helped to dispel the myth of the old days and the laws that were making how the government was playing is was instrumental in helping men oppress women and others, right? The last part of this article calls restriction becomes liberation. It says a fairy tale version of history says that during the 20th century, government freed women to become newly empowered in the workplace. The reality is exactly the opposite. Just as the market was granting women more choices, government swept in to limit them in the name of health, purity, family values, and social uplift. Such laws and regulations are still around today, though they have been recharacterized in a completely different way. As Orwell might say, somewhere along the way, restriction became liberation. If you like this content, if you like this type of content, then this is what I do. I delve into the peripherals of news and articles and history because I want people to understand. I want to share that with you. I want you to understand the history of what you have and the value of what you have. If you believe in this type of content, like, share, subscribe. Because without you listening, it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't help people. And I really want you to understand how valuable what is you have is, how valuable your rights are, and how you should guard them with every fiber of your being. They change the history. They change the wording. They make you think that something is one thing and it's really something else. And I want you to understand that we as women, as black women, as all types of women, we have no allies. They play in our faces. And if you want to see us expose and dispel those myths that they try to sell us, come back for the next video. Until then, until then, stay feminine. Send it in the house because they're gonna tell you he never had that, but he did. Now they're rewriting history, but he had to send it in the house, and the reporter says to him, "Mr. President, is it time for you to codify Roe v. Wade?" And he, in his customized laughter, said, "Ha ha 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 ha. It's not a legislative priority." And that's when I began to realize that we have no allies. Misogyny is part of the plan. The government is part of the plan. And you'll see how the government played its role to collaborate with eugenicists, with businesses, to keep women out, to keep women suppressed, and how the road to hell was paved with good intentions. But yet, because they suppressed people and because they did all these things to try to keep women out of the commercial life, as they would say, it turned out to be good for everybody. But here we go. All right. I'm not going to talk about it anymore, but I want to explain that to you. I want to put it in some kind of context because it's very important that we understand how they were thinking back then and what they were thinking. So take this any way you want. All right. The progressives attempt, and just for the record, before I start, this is not me choosing to be a progressive or a conservative. I'm simply reading the article, and I've been reading the article many times. And this is about the right of women and how government interferes to to keep women out of the workforce. Very similarly to what they're doing today. You know how whether they downgrade teachers and nurses, they're going to limit the type of money you can get to be educated as a teacher and as a nurse. They say that's no longer a professional career. Why? Because it's all dominated by women. Why? Because men are falling behind. I did a video about that. Go check that out. But here we go. The progressives attempt to halt progress. This is part one. Many now credit government for past progress in gender equality, mostly because of late 20th century legislation that appeared to benefit women in the workplace. This is a distorted view. Few know that government at all levels actually sought to prevent that progress. A century ago, just as markets were attracting women to professional life, government regulation in the United States specifically targeted women to restrict their professional choices. The regulations were designed to drive them out of offices and factories and back into their homes for their own good and the good of their families, their communities, and the future of the race. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but the population drop off was very much in discussion then. This is why they wanted to halt women's progress because they were afraid if women progressed too much, they wouldn't want, well, we wouldn't want to have children and the family dynamic will split apart. That was then them trying to prevent what they are still afraid of today, which is the population drop off. You notice that's always in discussion. They're trying not to panic about it. They panicked about it 100 years ago and they're panicking about it now, but it's a very slow, quiet panic. They don't want to, well, I don't know. It looks like they're trying to make inroads into making it more difficult for women to enter the workforce. But you let me know what you think. The new controls, the first around the century, excuse me, the first round of a century of interventions in the free labor market